Howdy all you delicious people, I'm here today to review Smallville Season 2, Episodes 10 and 11. So, right out of the gate for Episode 10, I gotta say I don't like how the Native American characters were showcased in Episode 10. To me, there was, odd music choices, there were, just odd writing, where it was just like, man, they're going in some kind of stereotype route that I just don't like. For episode 10, we have a villain that is just an animal, for the most part. And for 95% of that point. And I just was like, so this kind of comes off as a Laura Vandervolt bitten episode, or it just comes off as a Malcolm McDowell, Annette O'Toole, cat people kind of episode, which I liked the movie Cat People. There was an odd writing choice for that film, with the whole brother and sister needing to come up with a way to continue on the line of cat people. I thought that was an odd choice, but other than that, pretty interesting film. Go ahead and check it out, especially for the visuals, I'm sure. So, and I think I watched the first couple episodes of Bitten, and I was like, okay, this is quite a show. Because I liked Laura, and so I was like, okay, let's watch this hopefully werewolf show. But anyways, so we have to figure out why this wolf is attacking people. And then come to find out, we realize that one of the characters that are added in this episode must be a skinwalker. And I'm like, okay, all right. So interesting, I guess. Speaking of these characters that they add into this episode, it seems that this episode somehow had gone on to do so well that they decided to want to go on and continue these characters to be reused in later episodes to focus on the Naman story more. I remember that, and I'm like, because I was like, well, I remember these people, but I'm like, I don't remember this exact episode, because I remember the other, the Naman focus episode, and I thought that was this for some reason. But I was like, oh no, this is another episode. Okay, so they're doing that one somewhere down the road. Okay, alright, whatever. But so, with that said, I kind of laughed in episode 10, because there's a part where Lionel is getting clawed in the face, and I chuckled at that part. I thought that part was kind of funny. If it was supposed to be serious, I didn't take it seriously. I thought it was funny. But if I laughed at Lionel in episode 10, in episode 11, there was a line that Lex was to say where he had been burnt by the opposite sex, and I just started laughing at that too. I was like, what a line. I get it that he's had hard relationships with women, but I took it another direction. Just is he getting some burning sensations somewhere? Lex, what kind of loving you've been having lately? I went in the dirty mind route, because that's of course where I would go. But hey, I'll admit it. So, speaking of episode 11, we have two characters, count them two, return for episode 11. And if I were to not have gone on and mentioned numerous times through some other review, technically what was going down in episode 11. At some point before we get to spoilers, I will say a little bit of it. I'll say the first kind of like person who is returning, and then once we actually get into spoilers, I'll say the rest of it because of course spoilers. So episode 11 is a really dark episode that I really liked how dark it was, and I also didn't like the fact that, like, it seems that Lana is crying like a heavy amount in this episode. It's not because, like, she's a bad crier or something like that. I'm like, no, like, I don't want to see this character cry that much in one episode or get very emotional in one episode. Like, I just don't want to see that for this character. Like, I want her to be, like, the happy-go-lucky person that it seems that she is for most of this show. Until at some point she ends up becoming a person who goes to Paris and becomes a witch and all kinds of other things and whatever the heck else she does in this show. Somewhere down the road until she does what she does with her character. So anyways, but yeah. So with that said, me being very vague, but I think it's about that time to just go into I think it's about that double 5 time territory. Because there isn't much that I can talk about in episode 11. Besides Lex and Helen's relationship is on the rocks. As if, let's be honest, does that really matter? It's Lex is just being with another woman until that just doesn't pan out. And then they finally, at some point, seasons later, give Lex like a real shot at a relationship that seems to go the distance, so to speak. So with that said, yeah, I think that's all I can say to tighten my lips. But now let's go on, and this might feel like spoilers about episode 11. So I'm going to go on and say, because I've technically already said this in other episodes or other reviews. So in episode 11, we have Whitney returning. And so I, of course, remembered this episode, but I just didn't remember how dark it was. I was like, man, this episode just feels like really like it caught me off guard. I was like, wow. But like I feel that these characters needed this kind of thing so that way they can have something to showcase. To just be like, hey, yeah, look at me in this episode, and you can kind of like see me as like this kind of different person. But yeah, so with that said, yeah, just being very vague, let's go out of our way to just double 5 this bad boy up. Let's just go into that time yet again. That spoiler time. It's about the time to spoil this episode. So I just want to cover right out of the gate, because like this won't matter when I say it as long as I just say it. So, and I didn't remember this part of the show, but we have Lana who goes and speaks to Henry Small, and Lana is to need to ask Henry for a favor, and Henry tells Lana, it's like, well, here's the thing, like, I went on and got the DNA test, so I think that we need to sit down and we need to talk. And so Lana's like, oh, what are the results? Come to find out, Henry is actually Lana's father. And I'm like, okay, great. So evidently Lana's mother was to have an affair, or really like Lana's mother was to have this relationship with this guy, and then it didn't work out, and so she met this other guy, and I don't know, they'll probably play out the scenario of how that all went down to justify it all. But evidently, Henry is Lana's father, so that's cool. But I don't think they ever really do much with that, so it's kind of like a pointless thing. Just like, well, yeah, she has bio dad, but like, it's great that Lana has family, but like, they don't really do anything good enough with that, to my liking. Mm-mm. But anyways, let's move on. So, in the beginning of this episode, we of course have this corporate plaza. What a very generic term that they just kind of use uh, for this. So we have Dan Hammond, who I guess is to be the foreman for this construction site that they're building, this corporate plaza. They could have called it a cool, snappy name, like they could have called it the and like how they have like Luther Corp. They could have called it uh, the Luther Corporate Plaza. They could anyway. Uh, so this foreman is kind of letting everybody out, and we then all of a sudden have Joseph Willowbrook, who is talking to the foreman and saying like, well, hey, like, you can't be here, you can't be building this place here, and so on and so forth. And the foreman's like, nah, like, you can just kind of take that up with the boss, like, go and find Lionel Luthor and just take that up with him. So we then have this foreman who is kind of looking into putting flammable gasoline in his truck, because oh my god, they had to slap a big, huge, massive sticker on this thing that says flammable gasoline. Isn't all gasoline things, can't they be flammable? I don't know why you have to like slap a word like flammable. So the foreman is to go on and put gas in his truck, and he ends up getting attacked by this wolf. And the foreman ends up lighting a flare and blasting the flare. And so all of a sudden, I guess this wolf has this ability to channel this flare to come right back on this truck. And the wolf is looking on at a distance as this construction place is set ablaze and to explode because of the gas that is very flammable. And so that is the way of which that this episode is to open. So come to find out, they the next day are at this site that someone is to be of dead there. And so we weirdly have both Pete and we have both Clark that are on their dirt bikes. For some reason, I don't know why. Just to do something in the story, just to put something on in the show that looks different. But I'm like, dirt bikes? Really? Okay. Something to do. So Clark is to drive off with his dirt bikes after kind of hearing about what had happened at this site. And so all of a sudden we have Clark who's riding his dirt bike, and then he goes flying off of his dirt bike to then fall into this kind of this pit hole, where all of a sudden he is like, oh, I'm falling, and he then slides his way into, not DMs, he slides his way into this underground cave where he is to go on and meet a girl named Kyla, who is to go on and tell Clark about the story of Naman, and that Kyla is to be grateful for Clark for falling down this cave 100 feet and not having one scratch on him, as she has to go and rip his shirt off, giving us a shirtless moment, because now we really have to have Clark give us sex appeal to maybe attract a female audience to this show. If maybe like the pool scene from episodes before wasn't fitting the bill for maybe trying to attract a male or female audience. Anyways, so Kyla is to talk to Clark and is to mention about Naman and how this guy was a character that fell from the sky and was to have heat vision, kind of like Clark does. And so Naman is like, oh my god, this might have been a Kryptonian. As well as we have Kyla that is to explain to Clark that there is a possibility that Naman might have come from some star or some planet that seems to be no longer in the sky, which is telling us that this guy was probably from Krypton. So Clark is to not only get into this story, but then he's also to get into Kyla, because man, do they take a liking to one another right away, to where, come to find out, Clark ends up becoming obsessed with this woman, to the point of, like, I need to do anything for this woman, because it's going to pay out in the end, right? They're going to have this long-lasting relationship that lasts for, what is this, 8 more seasons? And then calling it a wrap? I think it's going to pan out. Sadly enough. So, we, of course, have we have Lex. And so it seems that Lex is to go on and talk to Helen. And Lex is to talk to Helen because he is to have a private investigator following his dad, and come to find out, we realize that Helen is to be in a photo with Lionel, and Lex wants to know why. I don't even know if this is going to happen in this actual episode, but I'm just going to say it regardless to get this kind of over with, because I don't think it actually does happen in this episode, but I saw Lex anyways, so that just kind of triggered this story anyways. So, come to find out, Lionel was to try and persuade Helen to break it off with Lex, but Helen disagreed with that, but Lionel was to give her the money anyways, to make it seem suspicious. And so Lex is to realize that it seems that Helen was going on and telling the truth, so then Lex runs off to meet Helen in the hospital to go on and tell her that because of the way that his father was and his mother and everybody, that Lex had put up a bunch of barriers and a bunch of walls, and he's fortified those walls over the years. And so Lex is trying to not be like his father, but he needs Helen's help. That he needs to know where to start. And so Helen grabs Lex's hand and they walk off together. And so, like, that's the story of what happens between Lex and both Helen in these episodes. So I covered that at least. So we of course, the next day, since Clark and Kyla seem to quickly become an item now, we have, of course, Martha's character, who is to be working for Lionel, and since Joseph is at odds with Lionel, because Joseph does not want Lionel to control the caves because of the Naman story that Kyla found, we come to find out that Joseph is creating this protest trying to go on and keep the caves, and Clark ends up talking to Lana and asking her, it's like, well, hey, like, do you think that your father can go on and help Joseph, like, keep these caves? And Lana ends up talking to her dad about this, and so we have Henry that brings to Lionel this paperwork stating that that he's found some like historical value for these caves and that Lionel cannot build over it. And we have the sheriffs that arrive and are arresting Joseph because supposedly he is to have blood from the foreman on some towel via his via on him, and so, or via like at his place, and so that was to immediately arrest Joseph. And I was like, well, who called? Like, was it Lionel? Like, did they plant that on him? I don't know. So we have Clark, who immediately runs off to Lex, hoping that Lex is going to pay for the bail for Joseph. And Lex, I want to think, asks Clark, it's like, well, why are you doing all this? Like, because this guy is like, Lex just kind of think that it's weird that Lex is gonna go on and put bail for a possible murder suspect, and Clark is just like, well, no, you don't get it. Like, we're just trying to save these caves. And when Clark ends up taking Lex down to the caves, Lex ends up seeing the octagonal shape, and he's like, oh my god, yeah, I'm gonna keep this cave and do whatever Clark wants because of that octagonal shape. Now I need to find that paperweight from before and connect the two and see what happens. So, because Lex doesn't even know about the whole ship thing, so the alien ship, so he just like, oh, an octagonal shape thing? It must be connected to that paperweight that I had before. So, we have Lex bail out Joseph, and so now we have Clark, who wants to talk to his parents about Kyla, and he also wants to tell them, it's like, well, hey, I'm going to bring over Kyla and Joseph to dinner so you guys can meet with them, so like you can get like a feeling of these people. So we have them all have dinner together, and so they're all kind of trading stories, and Clark wants to know more about the Namont character to kind of see if there's any connection, possibly between Krypton and this guy that they're talking about. So Clark is to also want to give Joseph some alien tech that maybe he can decipher, because Clark is just so easily just want to give up his secret to people, and I can understand why, but like, you really have to go on and find the right person that actually really knows. Like, we won't get to that kind of person until we have Clark, who is to find Dr. Swan, and then that's when Clark can like, oh, like it feels like there's somebody that finally knows about the stuff that I know, and so maybe I can get them to help me, and that seems like a really good story, a feel good kind of thing. Uh, that kind of just at some point just doesn't last as long as we would like to have it been able to. But anyways, life happens. So we have Clark and we have Kyla who are in the barn, and Clark is mentioning to Kyla like, well, hey, look at my telescope, and Kyla's like, well, I just would like to look with my eyes. And so we have Clark, we have Kyla, and they're talking about the star or the planet that's missing, and they end up kissing again. So we I'm trying to think here. I know there's some stuff that I think I've already covered. I think there is a moment where Lana is talked to Chloe about Henry being her actual father, and like I think there might be more than that, like that like Chloe and Lana are kind of questioning about that, and they go in more about that. I don't know. Let's move on. So we, God, there was so much about this episode that I'm like, bah! So we have wolf attacks. So the next thing that ends up happening as far as wolf attacks happen is we have the wolf that ends up going and attacking Martha's character, because since Martha is to be tied with Lionel, we now have the wolf that goes on and attacks Lionel because Martha was to try and be like the mitigator between both Lionel and Joseph, because Martha was to tell Joseph like, well, hey, like Lionel wants to kind of see you and kind of talk to you about like what bargain we can strike with this whole land thing. And then when Joseph gets arrested, like Martha is there to kind of watch as that happens. So Martha is to get seemingly attacked by this wolf, but Martha is in her car, and then the wolf is kind of like, ah, it's growling, and then they're like, that's all we see. And so when Clark is going on and talking to Jonathan, and I think that Clark is talking to Jonathan about how like this is everything that he's ever wanted with a girl, but like there's just something that just doesn't quite feel right about it. And Jonathan's like, well, like maybe it's just not like perfect. Like maybe how Clark saw him and Lana together. So Martha comes home stating that she ended up getting attacked by a wolf, but she's not bitten anywhere, so there's that for you. So we had Clark and Kyla who were to spend time in the caves at some point in this episode, and there was to be a moment where all of a sudden the caves start to shake, and that then led to Clark needing to shield Kyla from a rock falling on top of them, and Kyla was to go on and say, wait a minute, how did you do that? Like, there must be something more to you than I thought there was, and like, are you Namont? Or are you Naman? And Clark is like, well, I don't know what I am, but I don't think I'm that guy. So Clark has to go on and reveal his secret to Kyla and say that he is, to of course be a Kryptonian, but he doesn't go like thoroughly in depth about it. So we have at some point where Clark is to talk to Kyla and is to want the whole truth from her. So that way, like, there's nothing hidden between them. Because Clark is to tell Kyla, it's like, well, hey, I've been like very honest and forthcoming with you. Now it's time for you to do the same thing. And so Kyla is to be very upset with Clark, and then she runs off. So now we have Lionel, who ends up getting attacked with his face end up getting scratched. I think in either this episode or the next episode, we see Lionel, who is on this, I think it's like a treadmill or something, some exercise equipment, and he's wearing these wrist weights, and he's sweating. And if I were to have gone on and said that, let me pause here for 1 second. All right, so Lionel ends up getting attacked, and so now we kind of move on to possibly have there being suspicion of there being a wolf attack, because Lex is to figure out that it was an animal attack and it wasn't actually to be Joseph. So they ruled that out in the early part of the episode. But we have Clark, who realizes that there's a possibility that Native Americans have this story called the Skinwalker, where a person could also change into a animal, and so Clark is to possibly have that suspicion that Kyla's father may be this Skinwalker, and come to find out, Clark will be wrong about that suspicion. So we find out that after Lionel is to get attacked, Clark is to run into the mansion to try to hope that he can stop what's going on. And the wolf ends up running out of the glass and cutting the wolf. Clark runs off to see if he can help out this wolf, and come to find out, he finds that it's Kyla as the wolf instead of her father. So we have Kyla, and her cut is so deep that, of course, it's going to kill her here, and she won't continue on. So the next thing, we have Clark, who is to stop the construction being done on the site from before, that Clark is to try to kind of put himself in front of these bulldozers and to stop everything. And so Joseph then goes on and meets with Clark, just like, hey, like, you're doing a good thing here. And Lionel is to see that Martha is leaving him, to have Martha like join her son and hug him. And Lionel's talking to Martha, and it's like, well, hey, like, are you thinking that you're gonna lose, like, you're gonna probably lose your job if you go on, you do this? And Martha's like, well, that's completely up to you. And so we also had the moment where we had Martha and we had Lionel that were together, and while Lionel was exercising, and so Lionel had said to Martha that he felt that Martha reminds him of his wife being here, and all of a sudden Lex is to interrupt what was going on between both Martha and Lionel, and at some point we have Lionel who is talking about maybe there could be a partnership between him and Lex in the future, and Lex is like, well, I don't think I want anything to do with you. I think I'm fine doing what I'm doing, because they re-talk about the buyout that Lex did and it successfully worked, and so on and so forth. So we go on by the end of episode 10, and since Clark had lost Kyla, we then have Lana, who is to meet up with Clark, so that way he can be comforted by her, and they try to like talk things out. So another end of another episode where we have Lionel or Lana and Clark together, because it just always has to be like, they can't just end an episode with anybody else, it seems. So now with episode 11. So episode 11 starts, and so Clark and Lana are to be at the Talon, and it seems that there is a pipe that is not working. And so Clark is to be twisting this pipe, and it all of a sudden seems that like water is coming out of it, and then he twists it the other way and water is coming even more. So Lana is to get this towel to kind of hopefully dry off, or hopefully stop this water from coming. And Clark is to use his heat vision to seal the hole, so that way like the pipe will, I guess, be working again. And so Lana then asks Clark, it's like, well, hey, how did you do that? And he just said, well, yeah, I just kept twisting and turning and it just shut off. So Lana is all of a sudden noticing how wet Clark is, and of course Clark doesn't do the same because this is a show. So we then go on to have there be a possibility that there's going to be something brewing between both Lana and Clark, as Lana was to open this one drawer and see these pictures of Whitney and realize that, like, one, Lana is still single, but that Lana is kind of thinking like how her like Dear John letter went for Whitney, and so like there's a moment where Clark and Lana are like comforting one another with the notion of how things are going on with Whitney. So we then have Whitney that is to be in Indonesia, where he is with a number of military guys. And so Whitney is talking about all of the Smallville season 2 episodes that he's missed out on, and that he's asking his friends if they want to do a recap. And so, hey guys, do you want a review party? You want to watch along party with me? And the guys are like, no, like, you've already talked about what all happened in season 1 with Clark and Smallville and Lana, you've talked about that a lot. No. But no, like the guys are to all be sick of Whitney, who goes on and on about Lana and Smallville. So at some point they go into being under attack, and so that leads our characters to then be scrambling to try and make it out of Indonesia alive. So we so we so we go on to this path of things going on in this episode. God, um so come to find out, we have Whitney who comes back into town and is to tell Lana that he's back. And so Whitney, I guess, is to have some kind of amnesia. He doesn't remember anything. And so we have at some point where the news has to be broken to Clark that Whitney's back in town. And so Clark kind of groans because he's just like, man, like me and Lana like have been doing really well lately, and Whitney coming back into town like is just gonna ruin everything. Um, and Lex is to realize that when he's playing pool with Clark, and it's just like, well, hey, uh, like sorry, but like this is how the story is going, and so like Clark does say that to like his parents and Lex and everybody almost. So we have Chloe and Lana that I think have a heart to heart together, where Lana is to say that Whitney doesn't remember the video that she sent him, the Dear John video, but she still feels the same way, that they should have broken up. And it's going to be hard to want to go on and tell Whitney that when it seems that Whitney is to be pushing them to be back together. So, not even realizing that they had broken up. So, because Whitney is to mention that he, during the war, the battle, he had gotten hit with something and it really rung his bell, and so like he has amnesia. So when Lana is to mention anything about the past, or if anybody is to go on to mention anything about the past, Whitney is to, of course, not remember much about it. To the point of when Pete is to meet up with Whitney and just be like, "Hey, man, like you catching up on the Sharks lately? Do you know about how well they're doing?" And Whitney's like, "Yeah, like I haven't been much into sports lately. It just kind of is like, oh, okay." So kind of just telling us that like we're covering all our bases with Whitney not knowing anything that would normally be fairly important to Whitney, so that way he can go on and try to dance around the fact that this may not actually be the correct Whitney. So we have Lana who throws a party for Whitney coming back. And so at this party, we, of course, have Whitney wanting to get close with Lana, and it seems that Lana is trying to create some distance between them. And so Whitney is to possibly think the reason why that is because it's like, oh, like, so like you and Clark, like you've been dating while I've been gone, right? And Clark is looking at Whitney and Lana. It's like, no, like if anything, like we've just been friends like the whole entire time. Because considering this Whitney doesn't know what's really going on, he's just kind of making assumptions. So Whitney goes into the bathroom and it is to tear this door off this bathroom stall and chucks it. And Clark goes in the bathroom to see this happening, this event. And so we have Whitney who does like the cliche-ish jealous boyfriend thing of like, hey, like, stay away from my girl, Clark. So when Clark talks to Lana the next day, Lana ends up saying that Clark was to go on and destroy that bathroom because of his jealous rage. Clark is like, I didn't do anything of that. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, if anything, it was Whitney that was doing that. So, we had Clark who was talking to Lex and was like, well, hey, like, maybe like Whitney has some like post traumatic stress and maybe we should go on and like we should try to like schedule him like a therapist appointment. Like maybe he's dealing with some leftover uh like experiences and maybe his friends getting killed in battle. I don't know. So we so uh, God, I am just dancing around this finishing up of this episode. So we have at one point in this episode where Whitney is to find out that there's a military guy coming to his door, and Whitney wants to stop this guy from talking to anybody, as this guy is to deliver some news. So when Whitney is to make his way to Mrs. Foreman and this military guy talking, Whitney has a baseball bat in his hand, and I'm like, oh my god. So Whitney goes and smashes this guy in the face with this bat. I'm like, wow. And Whitney has like blood on his face. And so then he grabs his mother and like tapes her to this chair. And so Whitney, at some point in this episode, is to grab Mrs. Foreman or Fordman and ask her like what his favorite radio station is, so he can know when he is with Lana that he has something that is to be the right thing that Whitney would do, because this person who is Whitney doesn't know. So, and I thought that was kind of like a smart play, but it was a very dark approach of doing all this. So we have Clark that meets up with Whitney at his place to talk about the whole therapy session, because Clark is like, yeah, I think that you're dealing with some PTSD, and so like I went and put together a therapy session for you, and we of course have Whitney who just kind of uses this as like, oh, like you just want to get alone with Lana, like that's all you're trying to do. And Clark's like, no, I'm not trying to do that at all. Like, so Clark is to realize that Whitney is so unusual, to the point of also like Lana is starting to realize that there is something unusual about people in Smallville also. So Clark then uses his X-ray vision to then notice that Whitney's body seems fairly similar to uh, to Tina's body from episodes before. And so Clark ends up going on and making the comparison to his friends to just be like, well, hey, like, I think Whitney is actually Tina, and because like Whitney's body is just all wrong, and so like yeah, that might be the case. So Pete and Clark to make this assumption, and so we have Clark who is to break it, or no, we have Pete who ends up needing to break it to Lana that like, hey, yeah, this is going on. We think that Whitney is actually Tina, and come to find out, Lana is to grab onto Pete and have him eat a locker, uh, which means he like Pete ends up crashing his head into this locker, which I thought was like, wow, okay. So Lana, like I honestly was like so surprised, and I enjoyed this episode and I liked it. Uh, I wouldn't probably say it's like a top five scenario, but like it's probably in there somewhere. Not even maybe top 10, but it'll probably be in there somewhere at some point. Uh, so we have Lana, who is actually Tina, and so now Tina knows what Clark realizes, and Clark is to go on and tell Pete that Tina does know about Clark's weakness to kryptonite, and so we go on into this episode, and so now Whitney is to go to Lana and want to propose to her to try and rush the Whitney and Lana connection. And Lana, who is to be like um so like pushed by this, Lana ends up telling Whitney the truth, that it's like, no, like I was to go on and break up with you and I still had those feelings, and so now Whitney is to make the connection. It's like, well, like you just want you just want Clark, you just want to run away with Clark, and Lana's like, no, like I don't want that either, and but Whitney's like, no, like you just want Clark. So we have, of course, Whitney, who asks for Lana's uh, necklace because she's re-wearing the kryptonite necklace again. So much so that she shows this to Clark, and Clark ends up asking Lana, "It's like, you're not going to wear that again, are you?" And she's like, "Well, like when it's the right timing." So when he gets the necklace, and so we have at one point where Tina is to go into Lana's room and is to take some of Lana's clothes and take a big whiff of them. And when Lana goes into the room, she then changes as Chloe, and they both end up talking about what happened to Whitney, and like Chloe is kind of being very weird and very touchy feely with Lana, to the point of Lana just kind of being very like, okay, this feels weird. And so Chloe is to just be matchmaker with Clark and Lana, and Lana is very put off by that because it's like, well, hey, like Chloe, like if you had feelings about Clark in the past, like why are you rushing to like have me get with Clark if you've in the past like realized that being with Clark was a mistake, and then like Tina Chloe is to realize that like, oh crap, yeah, I guess there's a whole thing that I don't know about because I don't know much about this character. So we have, of course, a moment where Clark is to make his way back to the barn and is to talk to Jonathan, and it's like, well, yeah, like Tina could be anybody, and like I'm not sure where to start. And Jonathan's like, well, you're right about that. She could be anybody. As Jonathan is to give Clark the kryptonite necklace and put it on his neck, and is to drag him down to the cellar, or the little the little cellar place, for now Clark to, or for now Tina to become Clark, realizing that this will be the one person that Lana will supposedly want to be with, even though that won't work either. So we have Tina Clark that ends up kind of walking off, and so now Clark is in the cellar with this green kryptonite necklace on, and so come to find out, the ship that Clark was brought in on to be brought to Smallville, it all of a sudden activates and is to drain the kryptonite of its green power to then have it just be this like clear crystal. And when Jonathan finally does find Clark, he then unties him, and Clark is to mention how the ship saved him. It's like, okay, whatever that means. So Clark runs off to get to Lana, who is now at the Talon with other Clark. And so Clark is now confessing his love to Lana and saying that he loves her. And it's like, I'm sorry, like that has already like happened several times where where Clark has confessed to Lana that he really does love her. He's done it twice. He's done it when he was wearing red kryptonite, and also like he does just tell her. And so at this point, like Lana hearing this from Clark, it's like, well, like what's wrong with you this week, Clark? Because Lana is to mention that everybody's acting very strange and very weird lately, and it's not quite them. And so Clark ends up running in and is to tell Lana, it's like, hey, that's not me, that's Tina. And Clark, or Tina Clark, is saying, oh no, that's Tina. And so we have Tina Clark who grabs onto Lana and is kind of like dragging her. So Clark is to say a thing that only the real Clark would know. And so Clark ends up saying that he fixed Lana's plumbing. He cleaned her pipes. That's a euphemism for something. So Lana is to then realize that that is the real Clark. So we realize that Tina is to be at a loss here. So now we have Clark who is to fight with Tina Clark. So we have them like busting through these windows, and I'm like, man, this is pretty sweet. And like going through all of these fight sequences, and they're kind of at the like they're kind of grabbing one another and kind of doing like the old wrestling maneuver where they would do this like lock up, and like they would grab one another and push one another around, like that old fashioned like wrestling maneuver that sometimes they use but not always. They just kind of get into some like quick tackle or something like that to try to like start out a match. But anyway, so we have Clark fighting Clark here, and I'm like, yeah, like you have to have like an evil doppelganger like episode, and it's cool that we got this kind of thing this early because at some point they're going to do it again with stuff like Bizarro Superman or just other worldly Supermans and whatever and all this stuff that they end up doing. Because I do remember that there is other versions of Superman that are in this show. Besides you possibly tying in Crisis on Infinite Earths, which technically is to be the one thing that I'm kind of hesitant about wanting to watch just to get a slight cameo of Tom Welling Superman, but technically is to be an addition to the show. But like I didn't really watch Crisis on Infinite Earths when it was for the show because I had to have watched it when Batwoman was out because might as well to try to get some viewage out of that. But um, but yeah, but I skipped that episode because I'm like I don't care for crossovers. So maybe I may not do that for this show because it's a crossover. Anyways, so Tom, or Clark. So they're fighting it out, and what ends up happening is that Clark or Tina Clark is to put this air compressor over Tina's head, and she ends up wanting to like chuck it, and she instead like pushes her body so far forward that she accidentally is to stab into herself this stick, and we have of course Tina who gives Clark the kind of like Willem Dafoe Green Goblin thing by the end of like the Spider-Man movie, where Osborn ends up telling Peter, it's like, Peter, don't tell Harry. We, by the end of this episode, have, of course, Tina that tells Clark, it's like protect Lana. Um, Kind of like Whitney was to go on and say like, hey, like whatever you do, like protect my girlfriend, uh, or protect Lana because like I feel like she's safe with you. So come to find out, after that whole business is to be done with Tina, now Tina is sadly dead. She's not going to be returning. I actually liked Tina. Oddly enough, she was very obsessed with Lana, but like I liked Tina as a villain. She was actually pretty interesting as far as the whole changeling thing. That was kind of a cool thing. Plus, also when thinking about it, like they went from a changeling episode to a changeling episode where somebody changes from an animal to a person. Now we have an episode where we have a person who can turn into all kinds of people. So you can honestly say that like the show really gets into just lazy writing. It really just does. Like it just recycles so many things. It's ridiculous. Uh, but that's like the comic thing about it. It's just like, man, how many times can you just take the same idea and reuse it again? Because you go to the same well via the next episode. But anyways, so come to find out when Clark is to get back to his home, they then break the news that Whitney, the reason why that soldier was to make it to Whitney's home is because Whitney is to be dead. And so now we have to go on and mourn the loss of Whitney because he is to be dead and he will not come back on the show. They could have just said that he was missing in action, and they could have gave us hope that he was going to come back. Like, they could have just had an episode where it's like, oh no, like Whitney is missing in action after all, and like he rejoined with Lana in the end, and it just somehow worked out that time around. And they could write Lana off that way via the show, but they just didn't, to give us hope. That somewhere, somehow, Lana had a relationship with somebody that actually worked. Anyways, so completely worked to the point of like they married and whatever. Anyways, pushing on. So by the end of the episode, I think they end up asking, like, Clark, it's like, well, hey, like, have you heard anything from Lana? And I think Clark is like, no, like, I don't think I can just go on and just, from all that's happened, like, I just don't think I should just go and like, just try to be with Lana right now. I think it'd be, like, not the right thing to do. So, we have Lana that makes her way to Clark, and so we have now had Lana that is crying so much in these episodes. She used to also find out that her father is to be this small guy. But not only that, we then have Lana who's turning around, and she just lost Whitney, and like Lana was thinking that there might be a chance that like things could turn around between Lana and Whitney, but she had some mixed feelings. Like there was some hope there, but this was all to just be for naught. It was all taken away from her. So she didn't get a legitimate chance to in person tell the real Whitney like everything and how she really felt. She ended up telling Tina Whitney how she felt, and instead of just doing it through a video. So Clark and Lana hug, and this is just to lead to Clark and Lana just being close, and like Clark is not using this to like, oh yeah, we're gonna be like boyfriend girlfriend down the road. No, like Clark is just seeing this as like, hey, like I realize that this girl needs a shoulder to cry on, so like it seems like she's coming to me, and I'm more than welcome to let her just need me right now to be that shoulder to cry on. And like there's nothing more that Clark is thinking in his brain beyond that. It's just like, no, like if she needs me, then I'll be there for her. Because Lana is to say, it's like, well, yeah, like, and I love the fact that they try to like put to bed where Lana is to like have accused like Clark of so many things, even though she's realized that he's also saved her life so many times, and that like that Lana does need Clark right now, and it would be okay if like Clark didn't like accept that accept that Lana needs to be helped right now. But no, like Clark is just like, well, hey, just like water under the bridge, like it's all okay, like and so like, hey, we can just start again. Because always with these characters, there's at some point where they always have to rush to the blank slate thing of like, well, can't we just start over? Can't we just hit this reset button to just like see if we can do it better this time around? like that kind of seems to be like where we might be heading by the end of this episode, of just like, well, hey, like, um, not saying let's rush into dating and relationship and whatever, because Clark doesn't seem to be in a rush to do that. He's seeing other women, he's seeing other possibilities, and Lana is kind of so focused on her work or a number of other things, especially when Clark was to ask her about like Saturday, and Lana was to say it's like, oh no, I accidentally like picked up a bunch of extra shifts, so like yeah, Saturday is not going to work out. And then Whitney's like, what are you talking about Saturday for? What are you talking about Saturday? And then like Clark is to realize, oh, Whitney's back in town. It's like, oh no, like we were just hanging out and it wasn't like an exclusive dating thing. And like, but Whitney's like, you were dating, like you were dating while I was gone. It's like, no. So, and then that's the whole ripping bathroom door thing off. Uh, but yeah, so with that said, I don't know if Winnie's mother ends up getting killed in this episode. Uh no, I think she ends up getting freed by Clark, who finds her mouth taped, and Whitney's mother ends up saying like, I don't know who that was, but that wasn't my son. And so that's when Clark also makes the assumption of like, well, if she's saying that, then this is obviously Tina. Like, unless there is some other changeling, shape shifting character that I'm not aware of. Wouldn't that be an interesting scenario that you're immediately thinking it's this person returning, and then all of a sudden we would switch, and then it'd be a completely new person? Kind of like when Dave Bautista came to the show, and you're just thinking, I'm like, oh, this is gonna just be another god, what another Phantom Zone whatever villain for that episode, and then Dave Bautista comes in and he's like, no, like I'm not from the Phantom Zone, I don't know what you're talking about, just starts clocking Clark. uh like that was kind of funny, where it's like you're expecting this character to just be this certain kind of person, and come to find out, no, like he's just another character, that I think they end up tying Martian Manhunter at some point with that story. Anyways, it's been a while since I've heard that, or remember that episode. But yeah, but Dave Bautista is on Smallville. He's there for an episode, but I thought that was pretty sweet. Uh, but also thinking about it, yeah, like I think Dave actually was like he's a comic book fan anyways. Like you can see him in a number of like uh documentaries or biopics and whatever, and he's like wearing like a Batman shirt or a Superman shirt. So yeah, like Dave is a big fan of like this superhero genre, and at some point he went on to become Drax in Guardians of the Galaxy. Um, it would actually be cool if Dave went on and like just like it'd be great to see him in another way, to see him as like other DC characters or other. It'd be kind of cool to see what they do with Dave, because supposedly the Suicide Squad. There's a possibility that Dave was going to be in that film, but then they ended up going a different direction because Dave went on to do Army of the Dead, and so it was possible he was going to go on and be some character for the Suicide Squad movie, but maybe there's still a possibility that Dave at some point is going to become a really cool character for the Suicide Squad movie, and that'll be great. If James Gunn is going to go on and direct another one of those, and so on and so forth. So we'll see how that plays out at some point. But other than that, I think I'm just going to get the heck out of here. I've talked for long enough. I apologize if at some point there were some questioning parts where I'm like, I don't remember what happens exactly in this episode, or some consensuses I tried to make. There was a lot of stuff that I was scratching my brain about, and plus also It's getting, for me, very late in the day. So kind of my memory is to get less and less specific the later I go. Hence why I would go on and do certain reviews, and I'm just like, bah, through most of it, just because um, when you have these kind of certain long videos, and you also have whatever. Plus, also, just every day, just kind of not feeling the healthiest, and hopefully at some point I'll get there. Um, but that's always the complaint. So it's always just me moaning and groaning. Um, but maybe a lot of people feel like that, where it's like every day they just don't feel um, actually healthy or energetic or whatever, and they're just like, like yeah, like I feel like that every day, just mowed down. But anyways, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, buddy. Goodbye, buddy.